there. Never expected what happened next. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and desperation. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead, the kind of light that makes everything beneath it look like it's already dying. Ezrin Vaughn lay in the bed with both legs in casts, 3 ribs wrapped, jaw still swollen from where it had been wired shut for 6 weeks. The IV dripped into a bruised arm. Monitors beeped the steady rhythm of a man who should be grateful to be breathing. He wasn't grateful. He was negotiating. "It's the only way, Ismara." His voice came out wet and broken through the swelling. "You marry him, and this goes away. All of it. The debt, the threats, everything." The woman sitting beside his bed had a bruise on her cheekbone, purple fading to yellow at the edges. He put it there 3 days before they shattered his legs. His parting gift before the men came to collect what he owed. She married a man she'd never met to save the father who gave her that bruise. And she has no idea that the monster she's marrying is about to become the only person who sees this marriage is about to cost everyone at this altar everything they thought they knew. Ismara Vaughn was 25 years old and had been her father's collateral for as long as she could remember. Ezrin had once been a real estate broker in Atlanta. Charm on the surface, rot underneath. He drank the career into the ground and gambled the wreckage into a hole so deep he started borrowing from people who don't send reminders. They send messages written in broken bones. He owed the Quintero family, Atlanta's most powerful crime organization, more money than most people would see in a lifetime. When they came to collect, Ezrin couldn't pay, so they collected differently. The hospital bed was their receipt. But Ezrin Vaughn had survived his entire life by finding someone else to pay his bills. And he had one asset left. The Quintero family had made an offer. Their leader, Roman Quintero, 37, unmarried, was under pressure from the old guard to project stability. A wife solved a political problem. Ezrin's debt provided the leverage. The deal was clean. Ismara marries Roman, the debt disappears, and Ezrin keeps breathing. Ismara sat in that hospital room, looking at the man who'd fractured her collarbone at 17, broken her arm at 12, and split her lip so many times the scar tissue pulled every time she tried to smile. She should have said no. Every rational nerve in her body screamed it. But 25 years of programming ran deeper than logic. He was her father, the only family she had. He'd beaten her since childhood, but he was also the man who sat beside her bed when she had pneumonia at 9. The one memory she gripped like a life raft, even though it was full of holes. She said yes, not because she loved him, because she'd been taught that his survival was her job. The wedding was small, a private chapel on the Quintero estate outside Atlanta. No flowers worth noticing, no music worth remembering. Ismara wore a simple white dress purchased with her last paycheck from the restaurant where she'd worked 6 nights a week to cover rent on the apartment she shared with a man who repaid her by leaving bruises in places clothing could hide. She said her vows without looking at the groom. Roman Quintero stood across from her, tall, composed, watching her with the patient stillness of a man who'd built an empire by noticing what everyone else missed. He said his vows with the precision of someone signing a contract. His voice carried no warmth, no cruelty either, just the flat efficiency of a transaction being completed, but his eyes moved. During the ceremony, they traced the bruise on Ismara's cheekbone, the scar tissue at the corner of her mouth, the way she flinched, loss of breath, full body tension, when the officiant raised his hand to bless them. The way she held her bouquet too tightly, knuckles white, like she was bracing for impact even while standing at an altar. He catalogued every detail without changing expression. But something shifted behind his eyes. Something cold and precise that had nothing to do with the marriage and everything to do with the damage written across his new wife's face. Ezrin watched from the front row, wheeled in, casted. His expression wasn't pride, it was relief. The relief of a man who'd found someone else to carry the weight he'd created. He didn't look at his daughter's face, didn't notice the bruise he'd painted there. Or maybe he noticed and simply didn't care because the debt was cleared, and that was the only math that mattered. After the ceremony, Roman extended his hand to help Ismara into the car. She hesitated. Not rudeness, not resistance. The pause of a woman whose body had learned that every hand reaching toward her delivered pain. Roman saw it, read it instantly. He lowered his hand, opened the car door instead, stepped back. A small gesture. She entered on her own terms, and she noticed it the way a woman who's been hit her entire life notices every hand that doesn't. The estate was massive. Iron gates, manicured grounds, a house that looked like it had been built to intimidate, and then soften just enough to be called a home. A woman met them at the entrance, mid-50s, Haitian, with the kind of face that held warmth and authority in equal measure. Delphine, Roman said. She runs the household. Anything you need goes through her. Delphine smiled at Ismara, not the performative smile of staff greeting a boss's wife, the genuine warmth of a woman who understood that the girl standing in front of her was terrified and trying not to show it. Delphine led her through the house to a room at the end of a long hallway, not the master bedroom. Separate quarters, spacious, clean, fresh clothes in the closet, her size, a meal on the table, still warm, and a door with a lock on the inside. Roman appeared in the hallway as Delphine finished the tour. He didn't enter the room, stood at the threshold like a man who understood that doorways meant something different to women who'd spent their lives on the wrong side of them. You're not a prisoner here, Ismara. You're not property. The lock on that door works. He held her gaze. Use it if you need to. Then he was gone, footsteps fading down the hallway. No lingering, no expectation, no invisible strings attached to the safety he'd just offered. Ismara stood alone in a room bigger than her entire apartment. The meal smelled like something Delphine had made with actual care. The bed looked like it belonged to someone who mattered, and the door had a lock that existed not to keep her inside, but to keep the world out. She turned the lock, listened to the click, turned it again just to hear it a second time. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not from sadness, from the crushing, disorienting weight of realizing that the most feared man in Atlanta had just given her something her own father never had in 25 years, a door she controlled. She slept with the lock turned and woke stunned that nobody tried the handle. Lay there for 10 minutes listening for footsteps, breathing patterns, the creak of someone waiting on the other side. The morning inventory she'd performed every day for 25 years. Nothing. Just birdsong and the distant sound of Delphine's voice downstairs giving instructions to the kitchen staff. Ismara moved through the estate that first week like smoke, present but barely visible. She occupied corners of rooms, ate only when food was placed directly in front of her, apologized for things that didn't require apology, taking too long in a hallway, using too much hot water, existing in a space that wasn't hers at a volume slightly above silence. Roman observed all of it. The flinching when doors closed in other rooms, the way she pressed herself against walls when he passed in the corridor, making herself physically smaller as if shrinking could make her disappear. The way she whispered, sorry, like punctuation at the end of every interaction. He didn't push, didn't correct, gave her the thing no man had ever offered, time with no conditions attached. On the 5th morning, she was in the kitchen before dawn making coffee. Not for herself, for him. Because 25 years of training had taught her that a woman's value existed only in what she provided for the man she belonged to. Roman took the cup, then made a second and set it in front of her. You live here now. That means you eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, and make coffee for yourself first. Ismara stared at the cup like she'd never seen one before. Nobody had ever made her coffee. The gesture was so small it shouldn't have mattered. It mattered more than anything anyone had said to her in years. The calls started on the 6th day. Ezrin. From the hospital first, then from his apartment once discharged. His legs were healing. His tone was not. The desperation that had soaked his voice in the hospital room, The begging, the pleading father routine had evaporated the moment his debt cleared. What replaced it was the Ezran that Ismara knew in her bones, demanding, entitled, already calculating his next move. Have you asked him for money yet? No, Dad. Why not? You're his wife. You're entitled to. It's been a week. A week is long enough. Find out where he keeps his accounts. Find out who handles his money. You're inside now, Ismara. Use it. She took the calls in the bathroom with the door locked and the faucet running. She didn't tell Roman. She absorbed her father's demands the way she'd always absorbed his cruelty, silently, obediently, the way a body absorbs a blow and rearranges itself around the bruise. But every phone on the estate routed through Kale's, through Roman's security system. Thresh flagged the pattern on the 8th day. Roman listened to one call, heard Ezran call his daughter useless, heard him tell her the least she could do after everything he'd sacrificed was make the marriage worth something. Heard the voice of a man who'd sold his child to save himself, now demanding a return on the investment. Roman's jaw tightened in a way Thresh had only seen before someone ended up in a room they didn't walk out of. He said nothing to Ismara, not yet. But his people started digging into Ezran Vaughn with the kind of thoroughness that leaves no stone unturned and no secret buried. During those days, the estate began to shift around Ismara in ways she couldn't fully process. Dinner became a ritual, not formal, not performed. Roman asked her questions nobody had ever thought to ask. What did she like to read? What music did she listen to when she was alone? What did she want to be before life stopped asking what she wanted? She gave short answers at first, fragments offered with the caution of a woman testing whether honesty would be punished. Roman never reacted with impatience, never interrupted, never redirected the conversation to himself. By the second week, her answers grew longer. She told him about wanting to be a teacher when she was young, about the library books she'd hidden under her mattress because Ezran said reading was a waste of time for a girl who couldn't even keep a house clean, about the community college application she'd filled out at 21 and thrown away because Ezran needed that semester's savings to cover a gambling debt. She found herself looking forward to dinner, then feeling guilty about it, then confused about the guilt. The wiring Ezran had installed, that her comfort was selfishness, that wanting anything for herself was betrayal, still hummed beneath every moment of ease. Roman noticed. He noticed everything. The way her shoulders slowly dropped during dinner only to tighten again the moment the meal ended. The way she'd lean toward him slightly when he spoke and then catch herself and pull back. The way her eyes found him across rooms now, not with fear, but with something cautious and searching, something she wasn't ready to name. He didn't name it either, but he stopped looking away when she looked at him, and the distance he'd been carefully maintaining grew slightly smaller each evening. Not physical distance, emotional. The kind that closes when two people start allowing each other past the checkpoints they built to keep the world at arm's length. Meanwhile, Roman's world pressed in from every side. His uncle Silvano had been questioning the marriage since the ceremony. A debtor's daughter, no connections, no strategic value. Silvano was old guard. He believed alliances were built on bloodlines and leverage, not charity cases. He'd been building quiet support among the family council, framing the marriage as evidence of Roman's declining judgment. Roman handled it the way he handled everything, with patience and precision. But Silvano was dangerous in the way that family is always more dangerous than enemies. He knew the infrastructure. He knew the people. He knew where the cracks were because he'd helped build the walls. On the 14th night, Roman was waiting in his study when Ismara returned from visiting Ezran's apartment. She'd gone to bring him groceries. She came back with a bruise on her wrist where he'd grabbed her for not bringing cash instead. Roman saw the mark. Ismara hid it behind her back. Too late. He didn't raise his voice. He opened a folder on his desk and slid it toward her. Inside, hospital records spanning 15 years. Ismara Vaughn at 8 with a broken wrist, at 12 with a fractured arm, at 17 with a cracked collarbone, at 23 with a concussion. Different emergency rooms across Atlanta, same explanation every time. She fell. Your father didn't deserve saving, Ismara. Roman's voice was quiet enough to feel in her chest. And you didn't deserve to be the price. Ismara stared at the records. 15 years of her life reduced to medical shorthand. Every fracture she'd explained away. Every lie she'd told to protect the man who caused the damage. All of it laid out on a desk by a man she'd married expecting a monster, and instead found the first person who ever bothered to look at her closely enough to see the truth. Her voice cracked. He's my father. A title doesn't make a man a father. What he did to you makes him something else entirely. Ismara's eyes burned. She didn't cry. Not yet. 25 years of training held. But something in the architecture Ezrin had built inside her shifted. A crack running through a foundation she'd been told was permanent. Roman closed the folder. When you're ready to stop protecting the man who broke you, I'll be here. The crack widened over the following days. Ismara began hearing her father's phone calls differently, not as a parent checking on his daughter, but as a handler monitoring an asset. She started recognizing patterns she'd been too deep inside to see. How affection only appeared when he needed something. How every apology was a preamble to a demand. How every conversation ended with her feeling guilty for not giving enough to a man who had never given her anything, except bruises and the belief that she deserved them. She stopped answering on the third ring, then the fifth. Then she let one go to voicemail entirely and sat staring at the phone, waiting for the sky to fall, because disobeying Ezrin had always been followed by consequences that left marks. Nothing happened. The sky held, and something inside Ismara shifted from crack to fracture. Meanwhile, Roman's people delivered the intelligence that changed everything. Ezrin hadn't just been gambling again. The debts to the Quintero family were erased, but the addiction that created them was alive and thriving. He'd started borrowing from the Lazaro crew, a smaller but vicious outfit running Atlanta's south side. When they pressed for payment, Ezrin played the only card he had. His daughter was married to Roman Quintero. He dropped the name like a shield. The Lazaro crew backed off temporarily, but the message reached Roman within hours. Using the Quintero name without authorization was dangerous enough. What Thresh uncovered next was worse. Ezrin had been talking to Silvano, Roman's uncle, the man building a case to overthrow him from within the family council. Recorded phone calls showed Ezrin feeding Silvano details, Ismara's daily schedule, the estate's layout, security shift rotations, which doors were locked at which hours. In exchange, Silvano had been covering Ezrin's new gambling debts and promising something Ezrin wanted more than money. Ismara returned to his control once Silvano took power. Not out of love. Ezrin had never operated on love. Ismara was the only human being he'd ever been able to dominate completely. The one relationship where his power was absolute and unchallenged. Losing that control was disintegrating him faster than any debt. He didn't want his daughter back because he missed her. He wanted her back because a man who has beaten a woman for 25 years doesn't know who he is without someone to break. Roman sat with this information in his study for a long time. The man whose life his wife had sacrificed everything to save was now conspiring to destroy him from the inside. And Ismara, sleeping down the hall behind a locked door she was only beginning to trust, had no idea that her father's love had always been just another word for ownership. He didn't tell her immediately, not because he was protecting her from the truth, because he understood that the truth had to arrive at the right moment, or it would shatter her in a way that couldn't be rebuilt. That night, Ismara couldn't sleep. She found Roman in the kitchen at 2 a.m. making coffee. She sat across from him without asking permission, something she wouldn't have done 2 weeks ago. The shift was small. It was everything. She talked, not in fragments, in full sentences that connected to full memories for the first time. About her mother, who died when she was 6, a car accident that Ezrin never spoke about except to remind Ismara that she looked too much like the woman who'd left him. About the first time he hit her. She was 8. She'd burned the rice. He backhanded her so hard her tooth came out. He told her to clean the blood off the floor before it stained. About the years of learning to read his moods, the way sailors read weather. The micro-expressions that meant a storm was coming. The vocal patterns that meant tonight would be bad. The silence that was worse than shouting because silence meant he was saving it up. About the one memory she'd held on to her entire life. Ezrin, sitting beside her bed when she had pneumonia at 9, holding her hand, telling her she'd be okay. The single piece of evidence she'd used to justify every sacrifice, every bruise absorbed, every chance at freedom refused. "I'm starting to wonder if even that memory is real," she whispered, "or if I built it myself because I needed one reason not to hate him." Roman listened without interrupting. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of two people breathing in the same space without either one of them being afraid. "You don't owe him your life, Ismara. You never did." Their hands found each other across the table. Not planned, not romantic. Just the first time in years Ismara had voluntarily reached for another person. Her fingers trembled against his. He held them steady without tightening, without pulling, just held. It was enough. The next morning, Roman told her everything. The new debts, the Lazaro crew, Silvano, the phone calls selling information about the estate, and the endgame. Ezrin working to have her returned to his control like property reclaimed from a storage unit. Ismara sat very still for a long time. The information didn't break her the way Roman had feared. It did something else. It burned away the last thread of obligation she'd been clinging to, the final fraying rope connecting her to the belief that her father's love was real, and her suffering was the price of keeping it. "He never wanted me safe," she said finally. "He wanted me back. There's a difference." "Yes, there is." "What is Silvano planning?" "He's called a council meeting for tomorrow night. He'll present evidence that the marriage compromised the family and demand a vote of no confidence. Your father will be his witness, testifying that you're a liability and I'm unfit to lead." Ismara's jaw set. The trembling that had lived in her hands since she was 8 years old went quiet. Not gone, quiet. Like something being held in reserve instead of something being endured. "I want to be there." "Ismara, he sold me to save himself. Then he sold you to get me back. And tomorrow night he's going to sit in front of your family and tell them I'm worthless." Her eyes met Roman's. Steady, clear, unflinching. "I want to be in that room. I want to look him in the face. And I want him to hear me say what I should have said 25 years ago." Roman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we walk in together." The Quintero compound in Buckhead was built for decisions that didn't get made twice. Long table, 30 chairs. Every seat filled by a man who'd earned his place through loyalty or bloodshed or both. The room smelled like old wood and authority. Silvano sat at the far end, silver-haired, composed, wearing the calm of a man who believed he'd already won. Beside him, a chair waited for his star witness. Roman entered first, Ismara beside him. Not behind him, beside. The room noticed. 30 pairs of eyes tracked her the way they tracked anything unexpected, measuring, calculating, dismissing. Women didn't attend council meetings. Wives didn't address this table. Ismara was both, and she walked in anyway. Silvano opened with precision. The marriage was impulsive. The bride, a debtor's daughter with no connections, no strategic value, no strength. The union had attracted ridicule, emboldened rivals, projected weakness at a time when the family needed iron. He spoke for 12 minutes, every word calibrated, every sentence designed to make Roman look like a man who'd let sentiment override judgment. Then he called Ezrin Vaughn. Ezrin entered in a suit that didn't belong to him. He looked healthy, healed. The legs that had been shattered months ago carried him with the confidence of a man who'd already been promised his reward. He didn't look at Ismara, didn't glance in her direction. She was furniture to him, always had been. Something to use, not someone to see. He addressed the council with the charm he'd perfected over decades of borrowing money he couldn't repay and selling things that weren't his. He spoke about instability, about Roman's judgment being compromised by a woman who brought nothing to the table, about a leader who'd chosen charity over strategy. Then Ismara stood. The room went silent. Not respectful silence, stunned silence. The kind that precedes something nobody prepared for. "My father is right about one thing," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I brought nothing to this table. No money, no connections, no family name worth trading. I came here with a bruise on my face that the man sitting in that chair gave me 3 days before your people shattered his legs." She looked at Ezrin, held his gaze for the first time in her life without flinching. "I was 8 the first time he hit me. I burned the rice. He backhanded me so hard my tooth came out and told me to clean the blood before it stained the floor. I was 12 when he broke my arm because I forgot to lock the front door. 17 when he fractured my collarbone because I talked back in front of his friends. 23 when he gave me a concussion for coming home late from the job I worked to pay his rent." The room was motionless. 30 men who'd built careers on violence sat listening to a woman describe the kind they didn't put on their resumes. "He sold me to save himself. Stood in a hospital bed and begged me to marry a man I'd never met because his gambling debts had finally caught up with him, and I was the only thing he had left to trade." Her voice held steady. "I said yes. Not because I'm weak, because I'd spent 25 years being programmed to believe that his survival mattered more than mine." She turned to Silvano. "The man you're presenting as your credible witness has been borrowing from the Lazaro crew, using the Quintero name as a shield. He's been feeding you security details about this estate, shift rotations, door codes, my daily schedule, in exchange for you covering his new debts and promising to return me to his control once you took power." Roman's people presented the evidence. Recorded calls between Ezrin and Silvano, wire transfers, security footage, every transaction documented and time-stamped. The room absorbed it the way these rooms always absorbed evidence, silently, lethally, with the understanding that what had just been proven would have consequences that didn't require a vote. Silvano's composure crumbled. Not dramatically, in stages. The composed confidence dissolving into the tight-jawed silence of a man watching his entire play collapse while his own evidence was used to bury him. The council ruled within the hour. Silvano stripped of his position, exiled from the family. His allies quietly informed that loyalty to the losing side had a cost they'd be learning about shortly. Ezrin was escorted from the compound. Not violently, deliberately. Roman could have destroyed him. Instead, he let Ismara decide. She faced her father in the hallway. Ezrin's mask attempted to reassemble. The wounded father, the victim of circumstance, the man who'd sacrificed everything. "Ismara, sweetheart, everything I did was for us. You have to understand. You sold me to save yourself. Then you sold my husband to get me back. Not because you love me, because I'm the only person you've ever been able to control, and you can't stand that I'm not breaking anymore." Ezrin's mouth opened, closed. 25 years of justifications and deflections and cruelty repackaged as sacrifice. And for the first time, his daughter was looking at him with eyes that didn't believe a single word. "I'm not your collateral anymore," Ismara said. "I'm not your currency. And I'm not your daughter. Not after this." She turned her back, walked away, didn't look behind her. Months later, the Quintero estate in autumn. Ismara had transformed a wing of the property into a resource center, not just a shelter, a launch pad. Job training, legal support, financial literacy. The things that turn survival into independence. Delphine ran the operations with the same warmth and iron she'd brought to Ismara's first night. Every woman who walked through the door was met with what Ismara had received, a locked door that worked from the inside, and the time to believe it was real. Roman found her on the terrace one evening, Atlanta glittering beyond the trees. She was reading, something she'd only recently allowed herself to do for pleasure instead of survival. "You know when I knew?" she said. He looked at her. "Not the council, not my father leaving, not any of it." "When?" "The first night. You showed me to my room and told me the lock worked. Then you walked away." She closed the book. Every door I've ever been behind was locked to keep me in. You gave me a lock to keep the world out. That's when I knew you were nothing like him. Roman took her hand. She didn't flinch. The reflex Ezrin spent 25 years installing had been quietly dismantled by a man who never raised his hand and never walked through a door she didn't open herself. He kissed her. On a terrace above a city that didn't know half of what happened inside the families that ran it. No transaction, no arrangement, no debt. Just two people who started as strangers at an altar and became the thing neither expected. Chosen. Across Atlanta, in a studio apartment that smelled like stale liquor, Ezrin Vaughn watched the evening news. His daughter's face filled the screen, composed, strong, surrounded by women she was helping rebuild the lives that men like him had tried to destroy. The anchor called it a story of transformation. Ezrin turned off the television and lived with the knowledge that the daughter he broke rebuilt herself in the house of the man he betrayed, and she did it behind a door he would never be allowed to open again. She married him to save a man who never deserved saving. She expected a cage. She found the first unlocked door of her life. And the man they called a monster turned out to be the first person who ever showed her what it looked like to be loved without bleeding for it. If you made it this far, you felt part of what we're building. A space where stories don't just entertain. They remind you that the people the world underestimates are usually the ones who end up changing it. Drop this with someone who needs to hear it tonight.